prominent area studies programs are either scaling back or cut down completely, like the U Chicago program, Columbia program is also. So these are all the key, like, stellar programs. They set the agenda for area studies program all over the world, really.
Ameem Lutfi, welcome to the Colony Archive. So let me introduce you to the audience. You are a historical anthropologist, specializing in transnational mobility, a very interesting subject. And also, I think your research and kind of your teaching trajectory are connected, because currently you're an assistant professor at Lahore University of Management Sciences, or LUMS, but you have also taught in Singapore and the Czech Academy of the Sciences. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So we were talking. Privately before about our academic disciplines. You come from anthropology, but I come from area studies. And I think most of our audience, they're probably familiar with anthropology because it's a traditional older discipline. But then area study is, I think, newer, and also it's gone through many changes throughout the years. But can you enlighten our audience as to the origins of area studies and where it comes from?
Yeah, area studies, I would say it kind of grew to what we know of it today in the context of the Cold War, particularly after the Second World War, when the US realized that now it has to be the leader of the free world, and it saw that it had to figure out how to make societies into markets and states into conforming parts of the international order that required certain kinds of intimate knowledge of that area. Now, traditionally, when we do it in traditional disciplines like anthropology, in history, sociology, political science, ultimately, your concern is with questions from within the discipline, right? So you ultimately, as an anthropologist, I have to, whatever I work on, I have to say something about contemporary anthropology, where anthropology stands and so on. But with area studies, you don't have that requirement. You can actually have an argument that's basically about that specific area. So it was developed as a way of bringing together these different disciplines. So, historians, anthropologists, political scientists, all studying together and trying to figure out one specific area, right? How does the state work? How does society work? What are the people like? What are they consuming? What are the political, ethnic structures like? So on and so forth. Developing specific area-based expertise on it, which was different project from the traditional disciplines. And as I said, it was very closely tied to the project of imperialism, one could probably say, but at least the project of expansion of the US empire in the post-World War II context. So you had all of these big capitalists like Rockefeller, Andrew Mellon, who set up big grants for language learning, for learning expertise of certain areas. I remember even now, when I was in undergrad in the US, half of the Urdu studies people were people who were training to join the CIA or the security forces after that. So area studies very closely tied with, perhaps more so than history, anthropology, sociology, or any of those projects.
And that program, the State Department program called the Critical Language Studies, I think they only fund languages that are critical to U.S. security and imperialist interest, such as Persian and Arabic. And I think Urdu is part of it too.
Urdu is part of it too. And that's why no surprising that these things that in the 1990s we may have thought that area studies kind of go down, but then the global war on terror gives it a second wing. So with the global war on terror, these kind of questions about why are people believing the things they're believing in? Why are how do we communicate with them? Those kind of questions again emerged, and it got a second wing. But now, with also since the retreat in Afghanistan, it's not surprising to me that area studies has been impacted by that kind of change in the nature of the U.S. empire.
Yeah, and you're saying that because my reading was, and I think I read this a long time ago, so I'm not sure if it's true, but apparently even began in the lead up to the Second World War. So as the power of the British and the French empires were declining, I think the U.S. getting involved in the Second World War and understanding that now it has to imperially manage the world. So even during FDR, Franklin D. Roosevelt, you have this kind of emergence of a move towards area studies, basically dividing the world up into different areas that you study for imperialist management.
Yes, absolutely. And that's why the categories, the areas that we know of, South Asia, Middle East, North America, South America, I mean, these are all categories that were the same ones that were used by the British before that to divide the world up for themselves. The geography hasn't changed too much, and it's sort of the NATO's kind of division of where does one ship where ship position is also kind of coordinated with that, so it's very closely tied to it as well. But yeah, you're right that it already started with 1920s is when the US says, okay, it seems as if we're going to be the leader of the free world, quote unquote free world, or sort of the guardian of the free world, for first amongst equals in some ways. Yeah,
and what's also crazy to me is that the way area studies from its American origins has been globalized. I mean, I think a place like the UK, I mean, they still have their kind of traditional formations, like the Faculty of Orientalist Studies at Oxford, even though they also have the area studies designations. I've seen that at Oxford. But at a place like University of Tehran, that is in Iran, you also have area studies. So in a way that even outside the West, you have this kind of duplication and imitation of the area studies formation, to the point that the Faculty of World Studies at University of Tehran has, North American studies. So they're trying to do kind of a reverse power play. And I think it's a little bit bizarre because, if you take the thesis of Said in Orientalism seriously, knowledge production needs to be backed by colonial power. But in the case of, Iranians can, of course, study say North America, but to have a North American studies program that mimics the area studies formation that comes out of colonialism, I think is a bit strange. But then what do you have to say about this kind of the globalization of area studies?
Yeah, it's an interesting, I didn't know about this. I think it's absolutely fascinating that they have something called North American Studies. I'm guessing they're also do they have also you have with Persian language program or Arabic language program, half of the people are going to become poetry experts and half join the security forces CIA. Is that similar with North American studies, that half of the people join the state, half of the people
that's actually that's exactly my argument, is that because it's not backed by colonial power, it becomes a little bit bizarre. Because this is a good analogy that I often use in class, is that when say you study Urdu or Arabic or Persian at an American university, you can actually go to the security forces, but more importantly, we mentioned that, but more importantly, you can get funding from institutions like the State Department or FLAS in order to go to, say, a place like Egypt and study, say, gender issues in Egypt, and even say you're just parachuting into Egypt, you're only elementary Arabic, but because you have that funding and you have that power backing you, it makes sense to write a proposal and say that I'm going to study gender in Egypt, and you write an article, and even Egyptians start reading it. But there's no comparable opportunity for an Iranian or an Egyptian to come to the US to study American issues. The Egyptian can come and study Egyptian issues, or a Pakistani can go and study, say, Baluch issues, but they cannot write a proposal and say that I want to study gun violence or the abortion issue or the evangelical community in the US and be taken seriously. So I think there is that power differential, and no matter how much our universities try to mimic the area studies formation, at the end of the day,
the funding makes it very different. Funding makes it very different, and I think that's coming back to your earlier question about globalization. I'm guessing the globalization story to some extent would also be some of it, in Iran, you have this kind of the mimicking story where you feel that other people are having their own area studies, so we need to have our own. Other places you may have just seen the same kind of funding sources, stretching outwards. I know the situation has changed a lot now, but even like 6-7 years ago, or about a decade ago, the easiest way that you could get funding as a graduate student, regardless of what discipline you were in, was through area studies funding. So language funding areas, especially if you work on, or no, particularly if you work on countries like Iran or Pakistan.
Security countries.
Security, those were, I remember like after 9/11, for almost like, like almost 2 decades after that, every other grant that was on Pakistan, even, no matter what it was on, it used to have this kind of line, oh, Pakistan is always looked at from the perspective of security angle, but there's other issues to Pakistan that can help us understand the society. And that was the kind of justification that was enough to make your research relevant. You say, oh, Pakistan is important, but it's important not just for terrorism, it's important for other reasons. And that got a lot of people funding. I myself, was kind of, beneficiary of this global war on terror boost on funding on Pakistan. So it made it easier for me to do a lot of the work that I was doing. So yeah, you had, so we had the American Institute for Pakistan Studies. You have these organizations all over that have some branch over there, some branch over there. Funding's probably the easiest source of, getting funding, and, like how funding works. It's not that these grants tell you exactly what to do, but they gave you an indication of the kind of language that you need to speak with and the kind of projects that will work. And we see that, like all sorts of projects were shaped by that language, even if they were explicitly, of course, one would, it's silly to say that everybody was getting the grant was an agent for the empire. But structurally, it's also like hard to deny that structurally they were kind of, playing into that, like ourselves included.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah. And then so I'm also wondering, is there such thing as South Asian studies in Pakistan as an area of studies?
That's a good question. That's a good question. I would like to say that there is, I don't think there is a South Asian studies program. You have Pakistan studies, which is more state national oriented program. South Asian studies, I'm trying to think if there are universities in Pakistan, and I don't think I know of many. But South Asia as a framework still is very dominant in scholarship that's being produced by Pakistan. So people are still, whenever you're thinking about culture, language, religion, society, state, all those things, the point of comparison still, for some reason, continues to be India. So India is the ultimate reference. And that's, so even if Pakistan doesn't have, its own industry, like you go to a publisher, the publisher will ask, okay, how does this speak to scholarship on India, right? So if I want to write a book on Pakistan and I want it to be read by a global audience, I have to make some kind of overtures towards literature in India. You cannot get away with it. Even though one could possibly argue that, hey, India may not be the best point of comparison for us. It's a larger country. It's it's more divided. It's gone through a different development trajectory. The experience, particularly of global war on terror, is very peculiar to Pakistan. The nature of Islam as a global religion is very peculiar to Pakistan. So one could argue, perhaps, the Gulf or Afghanistan are more, or Iran, for example, are more apt comparison or sort of, frameworks within which Pakistan should be read. But the vast majority of academia in Pakistan would not agree with this position. They would still hold back. No. We're still very South Asian. And again, it's the kind of the influence you can create with large funding. it's very hard to shake off. It's very hard to shake off, and it sort of permeates in faraway places.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think you also spoke to the arbitrariness of area studies in a sense that so Pakistan could really be part of what is called Middle East or West Asia. Yeah. It could be part of Central Asia. It could be part of South Asia. And I mean, it's same with Iran even, because I think about my own area of study. And we have a very long history of interaction with Caucasia, but usually when you study Iran, it's the Middle East studies as area studies, and you don't really touch Caucasia, unless it's somebody like you who are interested in the transnational issues. But other than that, you usually either focus on Iran itself or just the Middle East, and you exclude Caucasia. And in a similar way, I think with Pakistan, it's pretty arbitrary to just say that it's a South Asian country, and you could really connect it to Central Asia and the Middle East as well.
Absolutely. I mean, with Iran, I mean, one could even argue that Iran should be studied as part of South Asia. You go, like Sanjay Subramanian argues that, at the point or right before the British kind of took over India, India probably had more Persian books than Iran did, or the libraries here were more. So it was a more Persianate society. So one could say that, then this is all part of that same, cultural landscape. And I think the arbitrary boundaries have everything to do with what we were talking about earlier about imperial logics of organizing power. So for the British, these were separate zones with their own commanders that you had to have in place. South Asia was somebody else, Middle East was somebody else, and the U.S. kind of copied the same way. And in some ways, the like nation states and the idea of concrete borders kind of more solidified it. These kind of trajectories where earlier you could be in that for 20-30 years Iran could be more South Asian. Then next kin comes in for 20-30 years, it can be more Central Asian, right? So, or Pakistan can be more South Asia than it can be more Middle East. That kind of flexibility kind of goes away with it, and you kind of think of it societies in more holistic terms too, right? So everything has to cohere and sort of get grounded in the same place, the kind of copying of the European models. We're English people, we live in England, we speak English, so you want to have, you people think that they want to have, you're in Iran, you speak Iranian, you're Iranian people, and your borders are the borders of contemporary Iran. So you want to have everything stacked into one. But that's not how society worked for most of history.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. And so I mean, we talked about the colonial managerial part of area studies, having that kind of imperialist post-World War II history. But then my understanding is that since the writing of Edward Said's Orientalism and the emergence of post-colonialism as a field of study, much of area studies has had a close relationship to post-colonialism. So in a way, they're rebelling against their colonial origins, at least, the scholars. So am I correct in this interpretation? Do you think that there has been kind of a shift towards being more critical towards colonialism? And I mean, I guess let's start here. Let's tell our audience what is post-colonialism and whether area studies has a relationship with it or not.
Yes. I think absolutely does. So area studies, we went on straight on a critique, but area studies does come with a lot of its advantages. I mean, the main advantage is that it really is committed to an eye for historical details. So if you're in area studies, you cannot bullshit with your, like not knowing the language or not knowing phrases. So, you have to be an expert of that specific area in that sense. So, and it does produce very intimate knowledge of those places.
As in Orientalism.
As does Orientalism.
Even more so, I would say, with Orientalism.
Even more so than Orientalism. And South Asian area studies in particular has very deep roots with Orientalism and this particular kind of like ethnology. You go to one tribe and then you figure out everything about them, kind of, like approach to studying it. So area studies, and I think post-colonialism in that sense takes a lot of the good qualities, let's say, of area studies. It is committed to, presenting people what they're actually saying, understanding things on their own terms, and trying to think about society that is not necessarily over-determined by the experience of colonialism, or at least that was the idea. I'm not sure if most of post-colonial studies still follow it. I think a lot of post-colonial studies does think of society as being over-determined by the experience of colonialism. So post-colonialism, I agree, is a grows out of it's sort of grounded in area studies, and we see this post-colonial scholars all across especially the U.S. They're placed mainly in area studies departments. Some maybe in history and anthropology and so on, but mainly area studies department. My main critique with post-colonial studies, and again it comes from my critique of area studies, is that it is a study that is very much located in place, that assumes that that the resistance to empire comes in local forms, that that you have an outside foreign imperial imposition of culture and power, and against it there is a post-colonial resistance to that speaks its own language, that speaks its own kind of culture. But what it does is that because of the area studies thing, that it assumes that things are, or sort of cultural units are boxed in units, or cultural units are territorially boxed units. So it assumes that that this will be like that too, that the resistance, that the post-colonial forms will only be local forms. So it's some village with its own culture. But it cannot then capture something like, or it has more difficulties in capturing something that has a scale that is anywhere close to imperialism. Something like Islam. Islam's not local. Islam's not, like in that sense, culturally grounded, boxed in thing like, like the kind of culture that post-colonial studies talks about. So I feel in that sense, its capacity to also speak back to imperialism is limited by that it can only launch a critique that is placed in one place. And imperialism, we know by its very nature, its strength comes from the fact that it is located in multiple places at the same time. It's it's sort of the global network. That's what makes it imperialism. So that's sort of so in that sense, that's area studies is both a product of it, and it takes both its sort of or post-colonial studies is a product of area studies and takes both its strong points and maybe sort of it's inherited some of its.
Even though someone like Said was a comparative literature scholar, but I think you're right that many of the post-colonial critics were area studies scholars. So
they become expert of very specific, tiny, small areas, and they assume that that the we were earlier also talking about decolonization, decolonization,
or decolonial studies, which is fake.
Decolonial aesthetic. So post-colonialism, I think, compared to something like decolonialism, still has a sort of a much broader and wider legacy.
And a clear intellectual genealogy.
And a clear intellectual trajectory that's sort of grounded in various kind of political projects that actually you have seen scale up to some form of considerable resistance. Decolonization is mostly aesthetics and sort of affect.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's also to sound cool and progressive.
It sounds yeah.
Whereas there's not much substance behind it. I mean, I think decolonization as a process is real, like what happened after the Second World War in terms of political independence movements. But as an intellectual, scholarly,
as an analytical category, it does nothing. As an analytical category, it does nothing. And again, I think the critique that I was presenting of post-colonialism, I think that same critique is much more trenchant of decolonialism. Because one of the things that I'm always surprised with is how, if you look at various kind of decolonial imaginaries that scholars have worked on, somehow they all look the same. So they could be, decolonial people in South Asia, decolonial people in North America. They somehow have, they're all have similar positions on gender. They're all similarly progressive in terms of, openness to religion, openness to diversity, and so on and so forth. So I'm always surprised. How is it that, like indigenous and local people everywhere?
Yeah, they call anything. They call anything non-European indigenous.
They call everything anything non-European indigenous, and then that to me is like the most Oriental thing that you can do, is to call everything that's non-European. Even in history, a lot of people use this word colonial period and pre-colonial period, right? Which sets up comparison of, what is it, like 300 years with like, what is decolonial, like pre-colonial?
Pre-colonial, so
thousands of years versus 300 years. It's just not an apt comparison. It's not things of the same order. And I think that's a peculiar problem also of like sort of this kind of very static decolonial thinking.
Very good. Yeah, and I mean, and the reason I mentioned the kind of the shift from the colonial origins to engagement or production of post-colonialism is to highlight the complexity that you can kind of be tied to funding that comes from the imperialist state, but at the same time try to separate yourself from it in some ways. But I think, I mean, there are real limits to it. I mean, one example. One example that I've been thinking about is so I'm part of MISA, Middle Eastern Studies Association. It's the largest North American Middle East Studies Association, area studies association in the Middle East that holds annual conferences. And they got, I think, criticized for holding conferences in the U.S. during the first Trump term and the first Trump travel ban. But this time that Trump has done total visa bans on 9 countries, most of which are in the Middle East and North Africa. And then 12 other countries are majorly restricted from getting visas. MISA still held their conference in Washington, D.C. So even though they send letters condemning the Trump travel ban and they take these seemingly progressive positions, and they're very kind of, I think that they're interested in post-colonialism and all that and decolonization as a process. But when it comes to the micro things that they can do to be effective, they seem not to do it.
No, absolutely. And, like, not surprising that, if you look at MISA's like numbers is so sharply declining. Over the last 10 years, I mean, the participants and so on, I mean, it's going down. And I think it gets to this other point about, this kind of, strongly worded letter approach to politics.
Virtue signaling,
as if you can solve most problems of the world through language. As if I am not using the terms that were ascribed to me by, colonialism, that in itself is a task of decolonialism, right? So that's the most, that's, the like people like Gabriel Rockhill argue that's the ideal kind of, opposition that empire could expect. One that writes, strongly worded letters, I love it, That's, strongly worded letters are great as a form of oppression. But it is this obsession with language game and language plays without talking anything about the political economy of it all, without talking about any kind of political change, right? So, I mean, I've, places like, Canada, I've seen this where they read out these names of these places before of, people who lived here and so on. And I always think that, if you feel so bad about, these tribes, how about we shut this stuff down and let's give it back to the people, What is just taking their name going to do?
Yeah.
Nothing. What is that going to do? Let's, you feel for it, let's give it to them.
I mean, position on the letters that you mentioned, when they write, strongly worded letters condemning something. That's another thing I don't get with those is that I understand if you write a letter, if academics write a letter and others sign it, if it's issue that's related to their immediate community that they have some power over, such as, there's a professor that's being sacked for Palestine, and they write a letter about that. But when they write a letter, condemning something that's happening in Iran or something that's happening in Sudan, it's just virtue signaling. I mean, it's It
also it's a way for academics to feel self-important. So we as academics, we think about big things, but we live a very ordinary life.
That's right.
So there's a disjunct between that. And we want to match that, we want to, match our reality to our thinking. And we want to think that we are big influential people. So strongly worded kind of letters. And absolutely right. Like if some of my, faculty member had, there was some issue, with an academic who got kicked out or who got, who's dealing with some issues, I'd write a letter. Because that's where I feel I have a position, I have something to say. I know this industry, I know academia. But something going on in Greece, and I write a letter about, like that. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that is.
And I made this distinction to some of my social media audience the other day, that I think there's a difference between life as politics, and not necessarily in the Asif Bayat sense, but in a sense that someone like Nasrullah or Yahya Senbar lived it, that, if your life is politics and resistance kind of defines your everyday life, then, that molds your character and consistency. And also you don't have to write letters. You just actually live it. Whereas with academics, like you're saying, I think because they live ordinary lives and politics for them is a hobby, then that's why these letters kind of become interesting and everybody wants to write them and sign on to them. And it's this weird flex that I just don't understand.
You want to write, angry, decolonial letters and then go have your, cocktails. So, or
mocktail. After Zohran rules New York, it's going to be just mocktails.
No, absolutely. And I think there's a peculiar moment that kind of coincided with, let's say, the later ends of the global war on terror, and the rise of this kind of race and gender politics in the U.S. Class was maybe at a earlier point with the Wall Street movement a part of it, but kind of went away very quickly. Then it was the Black Lives Matter movement, and then the Me Too movement. In that moment, it seemed like academia also had this thing where for about a decade, if you wanted to get a job, you wanted to put on that performance. You wanted to put on that performance of being, the activist, the angry letter writer. I think that period is already over. So those, but these things are slow to change. When you join grad school, you look at, what are people doing, what's successful, and then you imitate them. So it's always at a lag from the market, what people are doing. So people are still doing it, but maybe not, it's not meeting the same response. But you see this like a very practical kind of thing of people developing their social media profiles, people doing, like putting on these, like very aesthetics of activism, let's say. And I've always thought it was so closely related to, the market, expectations, because that's just what the market kind of wanted in that 10-year period. And it's already over.
It's over. Wow. I mean, I think what the market wanted in the 10-year period and still kind of wants is what we talked about earlier, is that, after this kind of post-structuralist turn, where you're obsessed with power in a sense, which it comes from a real substantive critique that you have in people like Michel Foucault, where you're trying to understand the operation of modern power. But I think the pop form of it has been that you critique power to the point that you will only support somebody who's most powerless. So when it comes to the writing of these letters, we want to connect this kind of bastardization of the post-structuralist moment to the virtue signaling letters.
Yeah.
Is that when you write these letters, you only support this kind of imaginative oppressed figure. So I remember when Israel, just give you a concrete example, because what I was saying was so abstract. When Israel attacked Iran over the summer in June, the 12-day war, I saw one of these academic letters circulating about the war, and it was mostly these Iranian studies academics and other academics who were signing it. And basically, the letter started by saying that, we don't like what Israel is doing, attacking Iran unprovoked, but it went on to condemn the Islamic Republic and the Iranian government and said that we support grassroots activists in fighting Israel. And I thought it was the most bizarre thing because, the state at this moment is the only force that can fight Israel. So what can these grassroots activists do? So also, this is this bizarre kind of element to these letters.
I mean, we're gonna go off on these rants from our discussion on area studies, but I think it's a relevant kind of rant about this kind of I have this thing against everyday politics, especially in anthropology. I don't know if area studies you guys have that a lot, but in anthropology in particular, there's an obsession with people seeing everyday resistance, as if somebody, not following the road sign is the same as, being part of, a militant anti-imperial movement, as if both are resistance, both are kind of, from the same thing. And I'm not surprised that kind of stuff gets funding all the time, because, it's great as a form of opposition, right? So, and all over, you look at, at least in anthropology, but I think area studies more broadly, a lot of it is just this kind of, local, everyday, small resistance, people, making inroads in themselves and people getting some kind of, sense of sort of, hitting back against the empire from it. It serves some function. I'm not sure what it is, but, is very common. It was very common, and as you said, it comes from Michel Foucault's idea about power is dispersed, it's everywhere. So if I'm objecting to things anywhere, then I'm objecting to it everywhere. Especially with Israel, I see this conversation with Palestine, and it always kind of really annoys me. Is that Palestine is also about it's also about gender rights. It's also about, Palestine won't be free until, women everywhere get their rights. No, it's a separate issue. It's a separate issue, Palestine's about Palestine. It's about Palestinian people. It's not about any of these other things. And it is, this kind of everyday resistance, I think it sort of doesn't read the structure of political economy in any way. It offers solution or resistance that cannot be scaled up. These resistance cannot be scaled up. They're local resistance. They can happen in one places, but as we talked about with empires by their nature are multi-local, or sort of they're placed in multiple places. Opposition in one place, they'll move to another location. So until you have a transnational opposition to it, it doesn't make sense. So we see this kind of everyday resistance stuff is it's so dominating, and it's sort of it also leads to where these new projects that are, let's say, even non-imperial things, like Chinese development projects, right? So local resistance to Chinese development projects versus US development project will look the same. It'll all be about people get displaced. They sometimes fight. They sometimes, use, they cheat, they lie, whatever it is. But they'll oppose it in similar ways. But can we as analysts say that they are still things of the same order? We can only say it if we only look at things from a very specific, localized lens. As soon as we zoom out, as soon as we talk about structures and political economy, we see that they're part of very different things. U.S. development structures happens in places where they're all building military bases, where they're also, making, their comprador classes or sort of, compromising elites. Was China doing the same? We haven't seen military bases as yet.
Yeah. Minus Djibouti, which is not really a military base.
Yeah, very small base, where, France has their base there, India has their base. So it's like the one thing over there. So I would say that ultimately leads to developmentalism and then looks very different, even if at the level of everyday, even if at the level of local, even at the level of micro, they look the same. They're things not of the same order. Again, coming back to this question of, how funding and so on. Slight tangent, but I've just in the past year, I've seen about 5 to 6 funded projects that are on critiques of Chinese developmentalism in Pakistan. So right now, if you want to work on Pakistan, that's probably the easiest way to get funding, is that you show how local people are challenging Chinese occupation.
And imperialism.
Yeah, it'll sell. It's a good tip for any graduate student who's trying to, get money. It's like, you talk about that, you'll get the money.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So talking about funding and all that. So the kind of the last theme I want to raise is about October 7th and its relationship to area studies. So how do you assess area studies after the events of October 7th?
Yeah, area studies is, all over the US. There's kind of the long-term decline that I've been talking about that had to do with changes in the nature of empire. It's accelerated, perhaps with October 7.
But what are the changes in empire?
So the changes in empire are particularly that if one would say that during the Cold War era, they were interested in some kind of constructivist mode. Through World Bank, they wanted to build dams, they wanted to build bridges. Through IMF, they wanted to bring, changes in how the economy functions, so they wanted to produce markets. Through military aid, they wanted to create national armies and, so on and so forth. So there was a developmentalist aspect to imperialism. They wanted to create nation states as real things. I think the change that has now happened is that all that is left is the destructive arm of the empire. Some scholars call it the U.S. retreat.
Yeah.
I don't like the word retreat because the retreat says that it's leaving people to its own, which is not what we see. I mean, how can you say that U.S. is leaving people to its own when there's we're seeing the worst genocide being happen? And
And I have a colleague named Matthew Capasso, and he has a forthcoming chapter in a book where he calls it accumulation by waste.
Absolutely. It is accumulation. It is primitive accumulation. Yes, it is accumulation by dispossession, or accumulation by waste. I think that's a really accurate way of describing it. So it's not building things anymore at all. So within this,
or destroying and then building something that would benefit very small interests.
Yes, but even that, I mean, I recently heard a talk on this, like even comparing some of this reformist language in Afghanistan versus in Palestine. So until Afghanistan, you heard quite a bit about, trying to save brown women from brown men kind of agenda, or, questions about how we need to reform the veil and so on and so forth. You don't see any of that kind of, things with Palestine. It's just bomb them, kill them, bomb them, kill them. That's the only conversation that we're having. There's no conversation of that, the developmentalist aspect. The only imaginary of development comes when, you have a clean, when sort of, you've bombed them flat and you've kind of disposed of the entire population. That's the only imagination in which development comes to their mind. So that's what I'm saying of this kind of, destructive swing of the empire. Within this destructive swing, my argument is it just doesn't need that kind of, intimate nitty-gritty knowledge of specific areas. It doesn't need it anymore. So you will probably then, what does that mean for future of area studies? I think it's still uncertain. How survive. We're already seeing that changes. Language programs in the U.S. have cut back. The bedrock of all area studies programs were funding for languages. So I think it's Title VI is the one that's called. It's been canceled. That funded a lot of these programs. FLAS funding has gone down. Fulbright Hayes funding has gone down. Prominent area studies programs are either scaling back or cut down completely. Like the U Chicago program, Columbia program is also. So these are all the key stellar programs. They set the agenda for area studies program all over the world, really. Chicago and Columbia. That's the places that I think about that set the agenda. And they're struggling. They're struggling to kind of keep afloat. So what would it look like? One thing that I'm interested in thinking about is if we will see something similar in terms of at least structural support or support in terms of funding emerging from these new Asian powers, like China, like maybe the Gulf states as well. Will we see them fund, similar programs, language program, Fulbright, study abroad programs, research grants? And if we do, how will they carve out the geography? What kind of issues will they be interested in? Will they also be interested in micropower, small resistance, small thing, intimate, detail? Or will it be interested in bigger questions? Will it carve it out into these territorially contiguous units that have, a very, very, extremely colonial roots to it, like South Asia, Middle East? Or will we stay, new geographies coming up, right? If the Gulf studies starts, a Gulf, area studies program, I would imagine they would think about, you cannot understand the Gulf without South Asia or vice versa. If it's China who's, starting, area studies programs, it won't, South Asia doesn't make sense. Maybe something like, the Belt and Road geography, like the Indian Ocean could make sense to them. Continental Eurasia could make sense to them. So I'm not sure what terms will emerge from this move, and what kind of scales will become important, what kind of questions will become important.
Yeah,
I think those things are still all up in the air.
Yeah, I think what you say is interesting because you're connecting the defunding and the increasing irrelevance of area studies to changes in empire, going from the construction to the destruction mode. But if you want to connect it specifically to October 7th, I don't have any clear data on this, but from anecdotal kind of experience, I'm seeing that much of Middle East studies is, especially the ones that are more interested in post-colonialism, and we talked about that connection between area studies and post-colonialism, that's really getting defunded, and then a lot of the funding is shifting towards anti-Semitism, which is, the broader political climate in the U.S., yes, where you try to deflect and distract by talking about anti-Semitism, which is a real problem. But then in the context in which it presented is that it's a way to distract from those legitimate criticism that you might have in a place like a Middle Eastern studies program.
Yes, absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. And it connects back to what I was saying earlier, that, the strength of area study program is kind of, commitment to grounded empiricism, to sort of, a very, historical eye for detail. I think some of those things are very strong, in at least presenting in a historical or intellectual, critique of Israel. Facts are hard to deny sometimes, right? So when you talk about, when you get to very grounded history of that area of the Middle East, it's very hard to deny. So it's not surprising that that these programs are cutting back. And you're absolutely right that the programs, it's not just all area studies for programs that are being, maybe all are getting, their fundings are getting scaled back, but the ones that are impacted the most are definitely the ones that have a strong contingent of people who are speaking about Palestine and the Levant region in general. Those are getting cut back, considerably. And yeah, anti-Semitism is, so right now, if, You talk about critiques of Chinese expansion, anti-Semitism. Those are the things that'll get funded left, right.
I was actually telling my LUMS students, my Pakistani students, that if you want to get funding to study in North America, just say I want to study anti-Semitism in Pakistan.
And then B grade scholars will get funding. Not even B, like D grade scholars will get funding to study it. It's kind of also like it's going to kill off area studies program if you have these mediocre very politicized people with a a genocidal agenda on their mind.
And I think the irony here is that because you mentioned how after the September 11 attacks, there was increased funding in Islamic studies, Middle East studies, that even gave you a personal boost. So in that case, the idea was that let's study the enemy and the people who perpetuated these acts of violence. But in the case of Palestine, it's the opposite. They're saying that let's not study Palestine. Let's not study, say, Islamist politics or Arab politics. Let's study anti-Semitism. So that's I think a weird irony.
It's very odd, and I think part of it has to do with the peculiarity of the Palestine case, which is just historically so unique in world history. I won't but in large part it is also part of this larger trend. That, as I was saying, that the empire was still somewhat committed to this developmentalist agenda in the global war on terror era. Not anymore. Right and left both. Doesn't seem like either side is interested in, some say that, all these things that Trump has canceled, maybe it turns out that it's just, machinations of a mad king. Trump is crazy. He comes up with these ideas. He's done it. But I still feel it's very unlikely that we'll see a return of these fundings, at least to the same scale, even if the Democrats come back. That's a scale. That's sort of a long-term shift. That's not a sort of a temporary kind of tick in how things are operating. Because even now, these area studies programs, like Chicago and Columbia, if the universities really wanted to give these area studies program a lifeline, they could have found other funding sources that could have saved them.
From Qatar,
of course, from Qatar.
Yes.
Qatar should also think about maybe it can open some stuff here too.
Fund Pakistan. So but they didn't give a lifeline to even they went. I think Columbia administration went along with the Trump when it came to cracking down on their Middle Eastern, South Asian, African studies program.
Yeah, a lot of people feel that it just gave university admins a cover to do what they've always wanted to do. But now they could do it without themselves looking like the bad guys. They say, we're just the poor guys. We're getting oppressed by Trump, and we're just doing what he says.
That's right. Yeah. And regarding that crackdown, how would you assess academic freedom in the U.S. where you got your PhD after October 7th when it comes to Palestine and Israel?
Yeah, so I never thought that there would be a time when I could say that that I feel more freedom in classes and generally in giving talks in Pakistan than I would have had I been in the US. So I have all these friends in the US right now, and they all completely talk about, they all have like some issue or the other that's going around them. Their admin has called them up, some other faculty has reported against them, some students have reported against them. They're all dealing with, this kind of, bureaucratic stuff and sort of like dealing with legal issues and dealing with, like survival and trying to figure out what they can say and what they can't say. Without any, and forgetting their intellectual agenda completely. And it seems as if now it's gotten, like even the most sort of mild milquetoast kind of critiques can get oppressed. I have friends who, it wasn't even about Israel. Like there's a friend who said something about Charlie Kirk online.
Oh wow!
And She got kicked out of the university. Tenured faculty from a state university got kicked out.
She was tenured.
She was tenured.
Wow.
She was tenured. Another friend of mine who their own colleagues have reported against them that he keeps on harassing us with information about what's going on in Israel and Palestine. And these are scholars of the Middle East themselves. That say, oh, he sends us these information unsolicited.
Oh my God.
And he didn't ask us permission for sending this stuff. So, you can't talk to your colleagues. You can't talk to your students about it. You can't have public things about it. So then, what are you doing? What are you doing? All these people, all of us who get into academia, vast majority of us don't do it to make money. We have some kind of, political agenda, intellectual agenda, it's like, personal interest, whatever it is, but it's something else other than money that gets us to do the stuff that we do. But this kind of censorship is going to completely kill it.
Yeah.
So it's going to completely kill it. So, you feel like, an abstract laborer much more in that sense now. So you feel that, oh, I am a laborer who is not working under conditions of my own working or conditions of my own making anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I mean, if I want to compare it, because we both have experience teaching transnationally, and I mean, the Western image of a place like Pakistan and especially Iran is that there are these repressive places where you cannot say anything. But ironically, I mean, my experience in Iran was that it is true that the state can become, can really crack down on dissent and on academics, but there are fewer red lines, whereas in the US now, there's just so many red lines. I mean, it's not just Palestine, it's also what you say about Charlie Kirk, the cancel culture issues, and there's just so many red lines for which you self-censor. And even if they don't actually come after you, there's this kind of a chilling effect where you self-censor because there's so many different red lines.
Absolutely. It's, it really could be anything, they may just not like your face. They can kick you out for that. No,
I don't think it's that bad, but
but I think you're right in saying what you said about places like Iran and Pakistan. I don't know, there is this kind of thing, like people, speakers come from, outside and they present at LUMS. And they're always surprised at it. And they say, oh, can I say this? Can I say that? I say, yeah. You can say whatever you want. There are, of course, there are certain things. There are very clear red lines, as in Iran, as in Pakistan, that you don't talk about. As in, someplace even like China would have it. Gulf states would have it. They would have certain red lines that you can't talk about. But that's a fairly limited set of issues. And even within that, there are, protocols of how and when you can, say those things. And the structure is not sort of, as streamlined to crack down upon you. So there's all sorts of, things that don't match in, maybe your bosses, in the US, it seems like at this point in time,
they're well coordinated.
They're really coordinated, like sort of power is very seamlessly moving, from the top to the bottom.
Yeah.
Here you could have sympathetic voices at different points in the kind of, power ladder who would be open to it, and you could negotiate, you could deal with them, you could find a way around it.
Yeah. This is such a good point. And I think Westerners don't understand this about our societies.
Yeah. They don't understand. I mean, even with,
there's more agency and flexibility in a sense.
Yes. Absolutely. And agency again, can you, is it, do we have, the it may not be freedom exactly in the sense that freedom is imagined in the liberal form.
Yeah.
Like, showing nudity. I mean, that's not, if that's completely your idea of freedom, then you could say, that.
Or standing at a street corner and like cursing the president or something like that.
Yeah. If that's your idea of freedom, then maybe, the US would have it. But, anything structural in terms of organizing politically, in terms of, having talks, in terms of how, what you call your classes. I would say that that places like Iran, Pakistan, the Gulf, China, maybe have more freedom right now than the U.S.
Yeah.
It's an odd thing to say. No one I would have never believed it. Let's say 10 years ago, even.
Yeah.
But it is true right now, I think.
Yeah. Indeed. So indeed, it's a bloodbath, and we have to see what will happen.
Yeah.
And we'll see. We'll see where area studies goes, whether it becomes completely defunct and replaced by the kind of more traditional disciplines, or whether it will evolve and resist. But Ameem Lutfi, thanks very much for joining us. Very productive conversation, and thank you so much for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Ameem.